I'm going to introduce Acting City Manager Tom Modica to give us a little bit of background about what's happening in the city.
All right. Thank you, John. So welcome, everybody, and welcome to Secretary Fleming as well and your whole team. We're really excited to have you here. So a couple things about Long Beach. So Long Beach is a big city. Often, we're right next to Los Angeles, which is one of the mega cities in America. But if you were to pick up Long Beach and put us anywhere else in the United States, in 42 of those states would be the largest city or the second largest city. So we've got a long list of cities that were larger than, but we are a big, big city, and we're really excited to kind of show you Long Beach today and talk a little bit about what we have to offer here. One thing we hear all the time from visitors is, I can't believe how much Long Beach has changed. So if you've come, last time you were here was 1978. We've changed a lot since then, but we hear that even from people who were here just 2 years ago, just 5 years ago, just 10 years ago, and that's a constant thing. I can't believe how much Long Beach has changed. And so I do want to start by thanking the Harbor Commission. We have two of our Harbor Commissioners here. I want to thank Mario Cordero. I want to thank the Port really for hosting us and bringing us all together. And really, it's an exciting time to be in Long Beach. We have amazing leadership from our mayor and council who are really helping to move this city forward. We're really in a renaissance here in Long Beach, and that's palpable. You can see construction happening everywhere. You've got the Joe Desmond Bridge coming up. You've got skyscrapers coming up. We're doing more infrastructure than we have in a generation here in Long Beach. Private sector investment has reached record levels in Long Beach, and we've got a lot of support from voters to continue to invest in things like our infrastructure, in our schools, in public safety. John mentioned this. We have about 6,000 employees here in Long Beach, and our mission is really to make everybody's life in Long Beach just a little bit better every single day, and we have a really committed workforce to doing that. So you're here in an amazing brand new complex. This complex is essentially a $500 million city hall, port headquarters, main library, and civic center, and private development, and all of that was done without raising any taxes. So that was all done through an innovative public-private partnership. We're the largest DBFOM is what it's called, design, build, finance, maintain, operate, and maintain in the country. Our Public Works Department has replaced over 22 miles of sidewalks and resurfaced 85 lane miles of streets and 9 miles of bike lanes. The infrastructure you see everywhere is pretty incredible. In the area of economic development, we have about 1,100 new business licenses that are popping up in the last year. We've done about $600,000 in small business loans. And one of our biggest economic drivers has been our land. So we've taken about 160 vacant pieces of property that we've assembled and strategically placed those out into the community. And all those high rises that you're seeing, those are coming on vacant land. So unlike some other cities where they're buying up buildings, tearing them down, and rebuilding, we're actually developing first all of that infill land without displacement. We've got about $3.5 billion in private sector investment here in Long Beach, 5,000 new units of housing coming online in the past few years. Unemployment is at record lows, median income is at record highs, and our university is graduating record number of students with advanced degrees, really supporting our economy here in Long Beach. And then, of course, looking to the future, we've got the Olympics coming, 2028. We are an Olympic city. We are going to be the largest hub outside of Los Angeles, and this whole area is going to be transformed. So we are really planning for that, about what happens before the Olympics, what happens during the Olympics, and what happens, of course, after the Olympics. And so I'd really, at this point, now that we've gotten to talk a little bit about Long Beach, I'd like to bring up our wonderful partner, Mario Cordero, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the billions of dollars of investment that the port is making to really increase international trade for the entire country. Again, a great time to be living in Long Beach and watching Long Beach really influence the rest of the nation. And so before I bring him on, I do want to really thank our Assistant Secretary, EDA, and the federal government for the ongoing investment. We're real excited about the announcement later today. And it's through these types of supports that we're able to continue a lot of the work that we do. And so on behalf of the mayor, on behalf of our council, and we also have council member Stacey Mungo coming in a few minutes, I would like to say thank you and welcome up Mario Cordero from the port.
Thank you, Tom. Again, from the Port of Long Beach perspective, thank you so much for your visit, Mr. Secretary. I want to say a couple of things before I make some comments about the Port of Long Beach and reading your background. I found out we have something very much in common, the love for piano. However, I started with my classical piano lessons at age 8, and you started at age 43.
I'm kind of slow.
No, but the interesting thing is, he didn't start just to have a hobby. You took lessons for a number of years to the point where you probably play a lot better than what I did after 8 years of classical music, you know. So I really admire that in terms of that. Second, we're celebrating Black History Month today, and I read a tidbit that I thought really touched me, which is in 2009, we had the first African-American president in the inauguration. You know, my wife was there, and you can remember that time, millions of people in D.C., so to speak. And it was an inauguration that a lot of people were seeking tickets to go to. And your wife, Cindy, gave up her seat to a woman named Mamie Love Wallace, an elderly African-American woman who was part of the early civil rights activism in Louisiana. So I thought I want to mention that because, again, it's so important to recognize that many of us in society in America, you know, we don't know what people do to give other people opportunities. And I thought what your wife, Cindy, did at that time was really something to be commented on. As to the Port of Long Beach, the most often asked question of late is, how is the coronavirus impacting the port? So before I answer that question, let me just tell you about this port. We're here in the nation's largest port complex, the San Pedro Bay Port Complex. And of course, from the Port of Long Beach perspective, China is our main trading partner. And here, we like to say it's ground zero in terms of trade with Asia. The Trans-Pacific trade route is the most important trade route to the country, that is the Asia region. And in 2018, we had a great year, a record year, 8.1 million TEUs, containers, moved through this complex. And in 2019, we had some bumps in the road. Of course, I'm referring to the trade war. There are some legitimate issues that have to be addressed with China, no doubt, and it's been rather complex. But suffice to say that that has impacted ports across the nation, and of course here, heavily dependent on China trade, it has an impact here. But the good news is phase one has been signed. There's already some movement with regard to what it means for exporters, the American shipper. Great news. But then another bump in the road came after that signature of phase one in December, the coronavirus. You've all heard the news, or you've all read the respective articles, and frankly, it is having an impact here. You know, at this point, depending how this goes, we may be looking to a 10% reduction in our cargo volume over and above what usually is a low month for us, which is January, February, because of the Chinese or Lunar New Year. But we'll get through this. The important thing is, Tom mentioned, Long Beach has continued the course. And the Port of Long Beach will continue with its $4 billion infrastructure capital improvement project. You see here when you go up to the 11th floor out the window, two of the main projects, the building of the Gerald Desmond Bridge, an investment of $1.54 billion. And then, of course, you have the state-of-the-art container terminal in the United States, the Long Beach Container Terminal, which we're in the last phase of construction. And by the time that last phase is completed in the latter part of 2021, the number of containers that are going to be moving at that particular terminal, if you equate that to ports, the top container ports in the United States, by itself, that terminal would be number 6. So we're very excited about our capital improvement project, and in addition, going forward for the next 10 years, we're going to be investing $2 billion, and a large part of that on rail. So given that we are the largest port complex and the connectivity that we have throughout the Midwest and to the east, rail connectivity is extremely important. So all this, as it relates to commerce and economic development, we are a port city. And our mayor, of course, is very proud of the fact that, and welcome Congresswoman Mungo. Oops, Councilwoman Mungo. I know nothing, all right? I don't know about your future plans. Okay, So she's a big supporter of the port and, of course, of the city's economic development in terms of what we're doing here as a port city. Trade is very important not only to the nation, but, of course, to this region and particularly the state of California. So I've given you a tidbit in terms of the magnitude of the Port of Long Beach, but one of the other things I want to end and conclude with is what we're doing in terms of sustainable development. This is a port that very much believes in corporate social responsibility, and our main objective is how do we reduce emissions from port operations. We started this quest back in 2005. As in fact, a couple of our commissioners today were people on the city council who were leading this issue of environmental sustainability. And thus, now in 2020, I would like to say that Port of Long Beach is a leader of environmental stewardship. And now we're not just reducing emissions. Our next quest is to eradicate emissions or harmful emissions from port operations. So it will take a while for us to accomplish our goals, 2030 with regard to terminal handling equipment, and 2035 with regard to transportation. In between now and then, we are moving towards bridging and using a more friendlier fuel like natural gas or renewable natural gas as a bridge with regard to the trucking component. So suffice to say that this is the only port or complex in the nation that has had a dual objective of growing business and also becoming an environmental responsible partner at the level that we have. So with that, I want to thank Mr. Secretary for you having the time to come here and visit us, and more importantly, the reason why you're here for the city of Long Beach, and Tom has kind of addressed that already, and I'm sure you'll be commenting. But as to Louisiana, during my time in Washington, I had a very good rapport in a number of meetings with your colleague, Garrett Graves, who's very much a supporter of ports in this nation, and of course, the whole aspect of goods movement. So it's been a pleasure here to make my comments with regard to the Port of Long Beach, but more importantly, to a supporter of economic development, which is so important not only to ports, but to cities like Long Beach. And again, this is a center of international trade here in Long Beach. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll turn it back to John.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. And I did want to acknowledge our 5th District Council member, Stacy Mungo, has arrived and will be joining us with Sam. Sam is a huge fan of the EDA. She believes in good jobs, and so she's joining us today as well. So thank you so much. And now I'd like to actually introduce Alvin Papa from our city's Public Works Department. Alvin's a great guy and an incredible mind. He is actually going to be overseeing the implementation of many different infrastructure projects in the city. But I'd like for him just to talk a little bit about some of the challenges we've had going back to the days of Councilwoman Bonnie Lowenthal, particularly on the west side of Long Beach, because these infrastructure projects are about commerce. They're about jobs that, in fact, they impact the entire region. Mario didn't get into all the numbers, but the numbers are staggering in terms of how many jobs are connected to this port and the trade that comes through the 710 corridor, trucks, trains. But we also have residents and businesses that are impacted by disasters. And so I'm going to ask Alvin to talk a little bit about some of the projects we've identified that impact thousands of jobs and many, many businesses in the city. So, Alvin?
All right, thank you, John. Welcome, Mr. Secretary and Economic Development Administration staff. Thank you guys for coming to California. Also would like to say good morning to Councilmember Mungo, Commissioners Lowenthal and Colonna. My name is Alvin Papa. I am the city engineer for the city of Long Beach, and I'm going to give you folks a brief overview about the citywide flood resiliency project here in the city of Long Beach. So back in the winter storms of 2017, there was a lot of severe flooding that happened here in the city. So a lot of people were impacted, and there was extensive property damage throughout the city. So extensive that the president actually declared a national disaster twice during that season. The city of Long Beach storm drain infrastructure consists of 23 pump stations and about 150 miles of storm drains. It's also supplemented with supplemental storm drain from the county and Caltrans. A lot of that storm drain system that the city owns is aged, it's old, and it's undersized, and it actually needs to be upgraded. During those floods, the floods actually created a lot of high volume calls. People that were affected impacted traffic, impacted commerce, and it impacted the life and safety of a lot of our residents here in Long Beach, particularly a lot of vulnerable populations. And so, although our first responders, our police department, our fire department, our public works, they came out and they did their best to mitigate and help our folks, they could not prevent the property damage that happened. They couldn't prevent some of the injuries that happened. We had flooding citywide, our I-710 freeway was impacted, and traffic actually had to get off the freeway and drive around because they couldn't get through. And it was pretty severe. And so, although we made it through, we here at the city, particularly at Public Works, we took a log of all the calls, and then we looked at all the priority areas, and we developed a series of projects to help ensure that this wouldn't happen again. We developed a list of 14 high priority projects that I'm going to talk about here, and I'm going to put them into 3 buckets. One is pump stations, the other one is storm drains, and then one very important project, which is our Lou Davis Street project. So the first bucket, pump stations. A lot of our pump stations are about 4 to 5 decades old, and they're in disrepair. There's a lot of mechanical deficiencies. The pumps need to either be replaced or they've been repaired multiple times to the point where we can't repair them anymore. We've stretched the life as far as we could. And a lot of the infrastructure is also undersized. The pipes are small, and one of the most important things is battery backup. A lot of these pump stations don't have emergency power. So usually what happens during a natural disaster is power goes out. Well, when the power goes out, the pumps turn off, and we don't have another way to start them up. And even if we got an emergency generator and tried to bring it over, when I talk about streets flooding, sometimes we can't even get those generators to these stations. And there are times where it's very difficult for us to respond, and sometimes we just have to wait it out. And so in the 2000 rainy season, there were various neighborhoods that were affected. Downtown, Wilmar Historic District, the Magnolia District, West Village, South Wrigley, Los Altos North and South, and Plaza East and West. And as part of this project, we've looked at those pump stations, we've figured out what needs to be done to get them back operating again. And so as part of this project, 7 pump stations will get a very amounts of work, but typically new pumps, new motors, battery backups, and then other various improvements to make sure that they're up to current code. The next bucket of projects I want to talk about are storm drain improvements. Much of the city system is still old, and over the years, the city's done its best to improve what we could, but there typically is not enough funding available to fund all the storm drain improvements that are necessary. And so during these floods, there were areas that flooded in the city, and since 2017, we've been able to address a couple of them, but not all of them. As part of this project, we've identified 6 critical areas where the pipes need to be upsized to larger pipes, and we also need to regrade the street flow lines to make sure that residents and businesses in the area don't get flooded in the future. The last bucket I'd like to talk about are the Lou Davis Street improvements. So Lou Davis Street is the home of Frontier Communications, formerly Verizon. So they've served the city for over 40 years. And they also serve as a major hub for all communications and emergency response in the city. So dispatch goes through them. In addition, business transactions such as credit card and ATM cards go through that hub. And so at that facility, there are 3 underground levels which hold critical infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, cabling, communications infrastructure, and all of that needs to be working during an emergency so that we can respond. They themselves understand how critical it is to protect against flooding, because if those were to flood, there would be a major catastrophe in this city. And they've invested over $350,000 to put up a floodgate. But in the 2017 storms, even with the floodgate and even with teams coming in to sandbag around, their first floor of that underground structure flooded. So thankfully, communications didn't go down, but they reached out to the city and urged us to do something about it. So for us, this became one of our #1 priority projects to look into. So as part of this project, the project aims to upsize the storm drain in the area to make sure that in the future that the communications in Long Beach are protected and that emergency responders can respond appropriately, that we could reach out to our people, and that businesses and residents can communicate during a natural disaster. And so in conclusion, this entire project is approximately $11 million. The project completion estimated for spring 2023, and this project will help Long Beach in the future prepare for future flood emergencies and helps provide resiliency. It serves and benefits about 75 businesses, which will directly and indirectly impact about 5,600 full-time employees within Long Beach. And as one of the largest cities in California, the Long Beach economy continues to grow. And so these important disaster improvements are going to help us overcome some of these long-standing challenges that we've had, and will help ensure that in the future, private developers and businesses are encouraged to invest in Long Beach and feel safe that their investments here in the city will stand the test of time. So with that, I will give it back to our director. Thank you.
I am so glad that Alvin was here to explain that, because the economy runs on this infrastructure, especially the information technology. And to imagine that our entire communications infrastructure has 3 subterranean levels that are flooding on an annual basis. This is a perfect example of how government and the private sector partner to reinforce that infrastructure to keep our systems running. So thank you, Alvin, for explaining some of that detail. And Dr. Fleming, did you see a little bit of New Orleans in the Long Beach infrastructure with the pump stations and all of the storm drains? And many people don't actually realize that Long Beach is in a floodplain and has been for hundreds of years. And we rely on this massive infrastructure and these pumps and these levees to make sure that all of the water that comes off the San Gabriel Mountains, which ends up in Long Beach, we receive it all, doesn't impact in a negative way our businesses, our trade, our commerce, and even our residents. So I hope you can see the parallels now that this might, Long Beach is a welcome and familiar place to you, very similar to southern Louisiana. But with that, actually, we're believe it or not, we're right on time, which is great. This is an opportunity for us to hear just a few words from Dr. Fleming and to make an announcement about a partnership between EDA and the City of Long Beach. And I would like to invite our council member from the 5th District, Stacey Mungo, who actually has many of these projects in her district and who has been a huge champion of especially small business, but infrastructure investments around the airport, infrastructure investments throughout the city streets and roadways and pump stations. And in fact, she's the chair of our budget oversight committee for the city, helping to put together the budget. And I've never heard of a budget oversight committee chair talk so much about pump stations. It's true. And when she brings this out on the council floor, people are looking at each other like, who is this person that she knows all this technical detail about stormwater and pump stations? So with that, I would actually like to invite Dr. John Fleming, the Assistant Secretary, to come and make a few comments. And then we'll have a chance for some questions from the media. And we'll try and wrap up with anybody who's available to actually just go to the roof where Dr. Noel Hasagaba, who's the Deputy Director of the Port, can point out how we're oriented here and how our geography works. So with that, Dr. Fleming.
Well, good morning once again, and hello, Councilwoman Mungo. You were not here earlier when I spoke, so great to meet you. And it sounds like you've been deeply embedded in a lot of work here, so we appreciate that. And in answer to your question, yes, this is very much like New Orleans. This, in fact, if you look at this and put it on steroids, you've got New Orleans, because we have levee problems too. And New Orleans is actually in a bowl, literally water. In fact, if you've ever, who here has ever visited New Orleans? Okay, so have you noticed the cemeteries there? Everyone is buried above the ground, and that's true of most of South Louisiana, because you dig a hole, it fills with water. And so that gives you an idea of just how much we struggle with water. Anyway, let's talk about some good news today. I, of course, represent the Economic Development Administration, and the function of our agency is to make strategic investments into cities, colleges, nonprofit foundations to remove obstacles to economic development. And much of our work has to do with creating jobs and certainly ensuring that businesses can flourish. But also another important work that we do is to deal with disasters. And as you know, we've had a lot of them in this country since 2017. And we were provided supplemental disaster appropriations in both 2018 and 2019. And that has to do with many things that have happened around the country, whether it's floods, hurricanes, wildfires here in California, and of course flooding and mudslides that y'all have been having locally. So application was made through our Seattle office for an investment into your city. And so I would like to announce today, hopefully I'm the first that you're hearing this from, that the United States Economic Development Administration is investing $8.9 million in the city of Long Beach to help make the critical flood control infrastructure improvements, much of which you've just heard about here, including the overhaul and rehabilitation of storm drains and pump stations that are also desperately needed to protect this great city's economy. So just to look back, there's also critically involved in this is a $2.2 million investment in local funds in order to attempt to match that. So as you can see, the U.S. taxpayers are investing $8.9 million. Your local city is investing $2.2 million, so that's approximately $10 million of total investment. And so why do we do this? For two reasons. One is to, again, remove any new obstacles that may have occurred as a result of any type of disaster, floods, mudslides, wildfires, what have you. But the also is for resiliency purposes. We want to make sure that when your city replaces these very important infrastructure things, that they're bigger and better and can withstand the kind of punishment they've received through Mother Nature over the years, so that you can spring back much faster next time. So those are our two goals in the process of our disaster relief. Now, just a little background on myself. Apart from being a family physician, I worked in the economy as an entrepreneur myself, In fact, you may be familiar with mailboxes, et cetera, now known as the UPS store. My company's been a regional franchisor since the early 90s. With that, we were part of the ground floor group that got involved in that, and that's a big Southern California, of course, project. Also been involved in franchising. So I have a great interest in economic development on a personal level. But now I get to invest my time and efforts in economic development for the nation, and that's certainly very rewarding to me. And along those lines, have you heard of opportunity zones? Okay. Now, since President Trump took office in 2017, we've seen the economy grow tremendously. 7 million new jobs created. Unemployment levels at historic levels we haven't seen since really the 1960s. And that's cut across all bounds in terms of ethnic backgrounds, race, gender, you name it. In fact, the lower quartile of the economy is actually seeing the fastest increases in their salaries. And that's all largely occurred as a result of three things. Number one, a dramatic decrease in taxation, a burden on the economy. Number two is a sharp reduction in regulations, which I've personally witnessed not only in the Department of Commerce, but I spent 2 years at Health and Human Services, where we took a lot of burden off the healthcare system in terms of unnecessary regulations. And so those two things have done a lot. Thirdly is trade, and you heard that mentioned here earlier. The United States after World War II really had a sort of a let 'em up easy policy when it came to recovering nations around the world. And so we gave a lot of trade advantages to our trade partners and previous foes. But, you know, these countries have risen, both in Asia and in Europe, and it's time that we have fair and balanced trade. So we've been undergoing tremendous trade reform, and as a result of that, you see we've got replacement for NAFTA now that I think is much better. And, of course, the first portion of the trade deal with China is now agreed to. So these things are lifting the economy. So you've heard it said that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's largely true, but for communities that are distressed. It doesn't matter how good the national economy is. If you don't have it going on in your town, it's not going to happen for you. And so the President and Congress, in its foresight, I'm used to being heckled, so don't worry about that. So I think they're certainly in their wisdom said, look, we need to do something for the difficult, distressed communities out there. And so they added to the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act opportunity zones. And as you know, that's over 8,700 census tracts that have been identified based on poverty level and unemployment level as being areas that we should be investing our dollars. Now, this is not a government program. It is a tax incentive program. It's targeted towards the private sector. And the idea is that when somebody sells an asset and they have a capital gain, that they invest it into an opportunity zone, hopefully for their own benefit, but also for the benefit of society together. And we're seeing this across the country, that many investors want to do good while they're doing well. And what do I mean by that? We're getting tremendous buy-in by the philanthropists across the country like Carnegie Mellon and Heinz and others that really have no direct benefit tax-wise because they're not taxed anyway. They're a foundation, they're nonprofits. But it helps them attract entrepreneurs, the private sector, to invest their capital as well. And so there have been a delay because it took a while to get the regulations out. They're all out now. And we're seeing qualified opportunity funds being stood up across the country and big, big projects. And we've been visiting them and seeing great results. There's actually 19 opportunity zones that have been designated right here in Long Beach, right? And do you have any actually projects yet that are actually funded by qualified funds?
We have now 3 local funds that have formed.
Okay,
And they are actually in negotiations on projects.
right.
Yeah, and one we actually are having meetings this week on, so
Yeah.
it's starting to come together.
Great.
Yeah.
We visited Salt Lake City a week or two ago, and they have, and we're seeing this all across, they're not just rehabbing a building. They're not even rehabbing a city block. They're actually marking off an entire acreage where there's huge rehabilitation projects. And what are being replaced is innovative entrepreneurship, where you bring in young people who start up a little business, they get a little bit of help, it's low overhead, and then as they grow, they take up more space. And so we're seeing that spring up all across the country. We also see a lot of investment in workforce development, affordable housing for those who are in training for skill. As you probably know, the area that we have the most need in this country is for skilled workers. Plumbers, electricians, advanced welding, all of those areas, we're in desperate need for those, particularly in certain parts of the country. Florida, notably, is that they have projects that are 3 years behind because they just don't have the people. They're happy to pay generous salaries. They just don't have the people. So that's where workforce development comes in. When it comes to EDA and opportunity zones, we're very closely involved with the White House on this. And in fact, since 2018, we've made over $362 million in investments in 272 projects that are in or near opportunity zones. You see, opportunity zones were on our radar screen all along, even before they were opportunity zones. Why? Because the criteria of our investment is where the need is, distressed communities, high unemployment, high poverty rates. And so we fit hand in glove with that whole concept.